Let's talk about what we learned in the first preseason game under the Disco Dan Bilesma era.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team every single day. If we are meeting for the first time, my name is Erica L. Ayala. I am your host here of Locked On Kraken, have been with you since the very beginning. I wrote for the Seattle Kraken when they unveiled their name. I've done some reporting on the Colored Hockey League and Willie O'Ree for the Seattle Kraken in the early years. And I am currently a contributor at CBS Sports, where I talk NHL and women's basketball. Also the founder of Black Rosie Media, where we empower Black women and melanated creators in sports media. And if you are in Seattle, come to Rough and Tumble tonight at 6 p.m. Pacific time. We're going to be talking about the WNBA. So if you want to know what I think about that fourth quarter by the Seattle Storm, you're going to want to come through. You can also watch live on YouTube. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. So the only way you can get that guarantee is by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. And where we're going to start today's show is talking about the first preseason game under the second ever head coach in Seattle Kraken history, Dan Bilesma. Of course, Dan Bilesma led the Coachella Valley Firebirds, our AHL team, to not one, but two Calder Cup finals, ultimately falling short in both to the Hershey Bears. And we've talked about it here on the podcast. That was a gut punch for Dan. It is something that he's still thinking about for sure. He knows that there are some of the guys that he has in training camp who are thinking about that, while also knowing that he's coaching an NHL team that has, the last year left a bad taste in their mouth. It was a blemish on the progress that had been made in season 2. And, I asked him a little bit about blending and what the right approach was to culture and things of that nature. And I want to get into that throughout this week, but I want to make sure we stick with the most pressing news. The more pertinent conversation is, of course, to recap yesterday's game. And in case you didn't see it, the Seattle Kraken fell to the Calgary Flames 6-1 in their first preseason game. Now, the thing that immediately stood out to me was some of the same defensive breakdowns that we see early on. Philip Grubauer was in net for periods 1 and 2, and then Stetska took on period 3. But the first 3 goals for the Calgary Flames all came from picking up rebounds. Unfortunately, Philip Grubauer down on the ice, not in good goaltending position, and that's how the Flames were able to score. I don't love seeing that in the preseason because I think we see that too much in the regular season for the Seattle Kraken. But my second takeaway, and probably the broad takeaway, is this is just the preseason. Now, I'm trying to walk myself back to calm after seeing some of the defensive breakdowns, because that's just a pet peeve of mine. And I don't like seeing the Seattle Kraken fall into bad habits. And we'll hear from Dan about how he felt about some of those things. But I have to remind myself, this is preseason. This is the first preseason game. This is the first preseason game under a new head coach. A lot of newness. So broad takeaway is it's just the preseason. My very nitpicky observation is that defense was not good enough. There were defensive breakdowns. We heard from Ty Cartier that ultimately, and Dan reemphasized this again, we'll hear from him a little later on the show, but Dan reemphasized what Ty Cartier and a few of the other guys told the media after the game, that The effort was very individualistic. The effort lagged at some points and times. And so it's really getting to better communication. Ty Cartier said it comes in having trust and kind of, a good communication. So those are things that, unfortunately, even though everyone said they're competitors and of course they want to win, those are things that are somewhat expected given where the Seattle Kraken organization is, again, with all of the newness. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not disappointing. And at least part of that is because, as Tart Cartier said, as a few of the other guys said, they were mostly talking about fights, which we'll talk about and we'll hear from Dan Bilesma in the next segment, because it was a very physical game. Ty Cartier was saying, listen, regarding the fights and whatnot, that you shouldn't be surprised. Everyone's, putting on for the team, the organization that they represent, and everyone wants to win. No one wants to lose. So the physicality, not surprising. But again, Dan Bilesma had a very specific critique and criticism and thing that he wants to see change immediately from the organization regarding physicality. So we'll get to that in the second segment. But on the other hand, for me, I think you can take that same thing and apply it to some of the mistakes that we saw on the defensive side. Just some of there wasn't a lot of cohesiveness. Again, you can kind of expect that. But what we also know is, as Ty Cartier said regarding fighting, and the physicality, hey, they've been playing hockey for years. Regardless of their age, they've been playing for a decent amount of years. And they're just certain things that you should always come with when you're ready to play. And honestly, there are things that you have to do as you're building chemistry and camaraderie, because you don't have that yet. You don't know the systems in and out. You don't know what the roster is going to be like. You don't have that built-in chemistry and synergy between defensive pairs and lines. And so what you have to bring almost to an exaggerated level at this early in the preseason and just coming off of training camp, you have to bring maximum effort. And at times, I think that was faulty. It was not maximum effort at all times. And that takes me to my third takeaway. Dan was not overall pleased. Now, is he going to flip a table after this preseason game? My estimation is no. But we've talked about this before. Dan Bilesma in a postgame, you can tell if he feels disappointed, if he's frustrated after a game. That really comes through in what his demeanor is in the post game. And we're going to talk about some of that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. With over 5 million active members, Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. And Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so that your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, your Prize Picks are still live. Prize Picks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my pick hits, I get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. That's huge. Now that is huge. And another thing I want to let you know is that Prize Picks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. So Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL. That will get you $50 instantly when you play a $5 bet. That's code LOCKEDONNHL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. And thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Again, Erica L. Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken. In case you missed it, I was also on with Gil and Rachel for the Friday Women's Hockey Spotlight on Locked On NHL. That's a great channel to check out, especially on Tuesdays when they do the Pacific Division Roundup. And we've got some fun stuff coming to you later in the month with a few, as I like to call them, squadcasts or crossovers in the Pacific Division. So you're not going to want to miss that. Make sure you stay locked on the NHL channel, just like you stay locked on Kraken. Dan was displeased. He was displeased, discontent, frustrated, putting it into context, but he wasn't going to hide, the disappointment. And I completely get it. And that's one of the reasons I really like Dan Bilesma in this new era for the Seattle Kraken. I mean, there's a value with Dave, the kind of demeanor of Dave Hakstol. I've said it a million times. If I've said it once, I've said it a million times. Dave Hakstol was very good at not offering anything that would throw players under the bus. And that was one of his superpowers. He stayed really even-keeled. You could tell if he felt that a question was phrased in a way that it kind of was disparaging in an unfair way to a player. And, I think questions can be very blunt. I don't know that they're meant to be disparaging or discouraging, but when Dan felt that maybe something was being taken away, he would not co-sign on that. I always love that about Dave Hakstol. With Dan Bilesma, I don't think he does any of that either. And if Dan has spoken to a player or his staff about something that wasn't going well, and we ask a question as media, my take is that if we ask a question related to something that Dan has already had a conversation about, that he'll say so, and that he'll give, his blunt feedback and response and reaction. And so that's interesting because I think it's a little bit of a different approach. And I think also there is a level of respect that you give to an elite level athlete, really anyone competing at or performing at an elite level, when you can give them honest feedback. And when you communicate honestly, it's not all doom and gloom, and it's not all rainbows and butterflies. It is about being real. And I get the sense that Dan Bilesma is pretty real. So in his real world, real words, how did Dan feel about the first preseason game? Well, let's take you to post-game media. And also, I apologize in advance. Anyone may be listening with headphones, just be mindful that there were a lot of plosives or those strong popping P sounds just because of the way the microphone was oriented. So I want to make you aware of that. So if you have to adjust your headphones and your volume, now might be the time to do that. All right, here we go in 5, 4, 3. Last chance to adjust the volume. 2 and 1. Here's Dan Bilesma.
Hey, Coach, when with the younger players, right? Definitely some nice moments, but also some mishandles and things like that. How much do you, in a situation like this where you don't have a ton of time with them, like how much time do you actually spend talking through some of those things, treating them as learning opportunities versus just kind of, I don't know. I mean, I don't really know what you do with those. Like, what do you do with those?
I think really for all the players, like we made some mistakes. We made some mistakes in what we're trying to, do as a team and a unit. And the correction doesn't come today. they have to have the mindset they're going out to play and play the way they can, and we'll make those, have those conversations, and but if they're coming off the ice every time hearing my voice saying you made a mistake and you messed up here or there, like, it's just putting them in the wrong mindset. So, did Berkeley Catton make a mistake on the face-off and lose his guy? He did, but he didn't hear it from me after I put him back out there and just keep playing. Oh, well, I never like getting beat, and moreover, I don't like getting out competed, and that will be clear to everybody. I don't think any one of the guys were happy either, so, every game's not going to go your way. Every shift's not going to go your way. You're going to take some bumps and bruises along the way, but ultimately, I just want to be relentless competitors, and you have to take some lumps. We made some mistakes and it went in the back of our net as a result, but I just want to keep coming back and being I want to be the ultimate competitor and keep coming back, and that's what our team will be.
I really love that from Dan Bilesma. I mean, he talks about making sure that the dissatisfaction, the distaste, the gap between the performance Sunday night and the expectation is evidently clear. Now, if you read between the lines, I don't know Dan extremely well, but there's like some things that you pick up when you're an athlete and you've engaged with coaches. I'm expecting the team has today, Monday, off. I'm expecting that the next time they have practice, the next time that they're on the ice, they're going to be practicing some things, and there's going to be some physically demanding drills. That's already what Dan Bilesma is all about, but I think he's really going to ramp that up to get his point across. But because there is a game where we're likely going to see a different roster, and we'll talk about some of the roster changes, moves, and what Dan's philosophy to making cuts during training camp is. We're going to talk about that in the third and final segment. But I think between now and the time that we take on Vancouver in the preseason, what's going to happen is likely conversation, maybe some film conversation, but very real, very raw, very to the point. And I respect that. I really do. It might be too early, but one question I am dying to ask Disco Dan Bilesma is how he approaches practice. And I don't mean the drills. I mean, when is the right time to lean into the hard and the demand mentally, physically, and dare I even say emotionally of having practice when you have a stretch of games versus laying off the gas a little bit and giving his guys a break. So stay tuned, because I'll be around for training camp and maybe want to ask Dan that out of practice. But coming up next, we're going to lean into the physicality. This game got really physical towards the end. If you listen to the show, you know that's not my favorite thing in the world. That being said, I know it's a part of the game, and I liked what Dan had to say about how he thinks about physicality just overall, including throwing the gloves down, and why he was still disappointed in what he saw. That's coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by Indeed. A lot of us, myself included, are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. And so listeners of this show, you will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/locked-on. Just go to Indeed.com/locked-on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/locked-on. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, then you need Indeed. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken also brought to you by our friends at FanDuel and NFL fans talking to you. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So don't forget, join America's #1 sportsbook by heading over to FanDuel.com. Again, that's FanDuel.com to look at the odds for your favorite NFL team. You know they have the futures bets, which we love. How many points do you think the Seattle Kraken can score this year? 87.5? You're taking the over? You're taking the under? You can find all that and more at FanDuel. Remember, that's FanDuel.com, and we hope you gamble responsibly. Dan Bilesma. I am liking this guy's style more and more. Never quite satisfied, always wanting more, always wanting to hustle. And I love it. I love it. We heard him talk about, again, what I talked about, which is it's a preseason game. Did things go the way he wanted them to? Not always. And it's not about overreacting. He gave that anecdote about Catton. You also said he's going to make sure that the point gets across. We heard him say that. But I think there's another element of Dan Bilesma where he really endeared me to how he thinks about the game. I've said it before. I don't really like fighting in hockey. I think there are so many things about it that I quite honestly just find ridiculous. And I know it's a part of hockey culture. So when Dan Bilesma had some words about when Dan Bilesma was asked about the physicality, a very physical game, lots of little skirmishes, I found his answer, as someone who doesn't like fighting in hockey, exactly what I would want to hear from a coach in this regard. I've said it before, we're not a big team. We didn't have a big lineup. And that can present challenges when you know that hockey just in general, even if you're not getting into the enforcer stuff, is a physically demanding game. So how do you counter that? What kind of energy, what kind of attitude, what kind of personnel do you need on a team to be successful, knowing that there's so much physicality in hockey? And, I think Dan gave us some insight into what he's expecting from his team and why what he saw Sunday night, quite honestly, fell short. Here's what Dan Bilesma had to say specifically with regard to the physicality and, again, some of the little one-offs and physicality fighting that happened on Sunday against the Calgary Flames.
He did. I guess the thing that I didn't like about it, it's reactionary. And we don't want to be reactionary. We want to be, I can't say that word. We want to be the aggressor, both in how we play and both the physicality standpoint of it. So, I just don't like the response. I like it to be we be the aggressors in both in how we play and in the physicality standpoint. So good on our guys for responding, but I'd like to see it the opposite way.
I love that. I'm here for it. If you're going to play that kind of a game, yeah, be about it. And there have been times, I know that watching the interwebs and social media, even in our chats here on Locked On Kraken, where we were kind of baffed and baffled by the lack of response at times from the Seattle Kraken. And is that because we're just a smaller team? We don't have a lot of big enforcer type guys? Was that because of a little bit of the mentality that Dan Bilesma was saying was lacking even just from Sunday's game? Well, he's putting the team on notice. And I think this goes veteran, baby vet to rookie. We are going to be the team that starts it. And hopefully they can also be the team that finishes it, especially on the scoreboard. But Dan also talked to us about what his philosophy or what the process is going to be like in the next handful of days, knowing that you got to trim the roster. And we did get some announcements earlier today on Monday. I'm going to go over those as well. But it was actually Kate Shefty. I like how she asked this question. She said to Dan, so we're emotionally prepared. What will cuts look like? And here's what Disco Dan told us. This was from the Saturday practice.
I'll just say it this way. Like, we have 6 exhibition games. We have 2 that I view are the start of training camp. The 2 there, a lot of veterans will essentially split those 2 games. And it is an opportunity for the younger players to get an exhibition game. And I view 3 and 4 as the next step for the team in terms of the 30 to 35 players that have a chance to progress and earn a spot with games 3 and 4. And then 5 and 6, you're looking more toward getting much closer to the 23 number and playing 5 and 6 with a tighter group at that point in time.
I mean, this sounds pretty reasonable, not anything out of the norm. We did see some early cuts. These are young guys, that only one of them from this list that was reassigned suited up in a preseason game, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But we already have our first crew that's going to be reassigned. So of the 9 players that were reassigned today, it was Lukas Dragicevic who was on Sunday's roster. So he's the only one from this list that was able to get in a little bit of preseason action. Not really surprised here by this list. I think, again, we heard from Dan Bilesma just now reacting and responding, I should say, to Kate Shefty's question about when to make the cuts. These are players that we expected would be in junior hockey, so no real surprises. And he wants to, Dan Bilesma that is, and his coaching staff, to prioritize some of the next few games for some of those younger players and to get them some time to give them a shot to help the coaching staff make a case for them one way or the other. So we're pretty much on target for that. And it'll be interesting to see if the teams A, B, and C, and if you're a Locked On Kraken insider, you should have that full roster. It'll be interesting to see if, for the first 3 games in particular, those 3 groups go as a total group, or if there is some bouncing around. Dan on Saturday sounded like there could be some flexibility there. So it's just a matter of what we see. We do expect Joey Decord, and we'll talk about this on tomorrow's episode, Joey Decord to get the first 2 periods, and that would leave, I believe, Jack LaFontaine to get the 3rd period, just like we saw from Stetska. But when we know more, we will tell you more. That is our episode of Locked On Kraken. As always, thank you for making us a part of your daily destination every single day. We are in season 5 days a week. If you missed it, we have Zane Begg, who is the owner of Davy Jones Locker Room and site manager over there, who is going to be joining us once a week. And those episodes should go live to you on Thursdays, and we will keep you posted there. As I say at the end of every show, be kind to yourself, because that opens you up to be genuinely kind to others. Let's hold fast. Let's stay true. And let's go Kraken. It's the preseason. We got a new era under Disco Dan. It's going to be a good time. And we will have all of the news for you right here on Locked On Kraken. I will catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.